think we'll get started. And if we have some folks that join us, I'm sure they can pick up right where we are. Good evening, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this virtual reading with Jack Mayer. And Jack is a local author, poet, and retired pediatrician, as I'm sure many of you know. Though I can attest he still probably is in the practice sometimes because he gave my daughter her flu shot last year. And I tried to tell her that it was an amazing opportunity to get her flu vaccine from a famous author. She wasn't quite sold on that, but anyway, it was a delight and a very Vermont experience to have both a local poet as your pediatrician. So Jack's first practice was on the Canadian border, where he began writing poems about his practice in hiking Vermont's Long Trail. He was a cancer researcher at Columbia University from 1987 to 1991. And then he returned to Vermont as a primary care pediatrician and established Rainbow Pediatrics in Middlebury in 1991. Dr. Mayer retired in 2021, and he was an instructor in pediatrics at the University of Vermont and a pre-med advisor at Middlebury College. He's written 2 books, Life in a Jar, the Irena Sendler Project, and Before the Court of Heaven, and 2 poetry collections, Poems from the Wilderness. And tonight's sort of special feature is readings from Entanglements, Physics, Love, and Wilderness Dreams. So Jack, I'll turn it over to you to read, and then we can do a short follow-up with a Q&A from folks if they're interested.
Okay, good. Thank you, Coco, and thank you for your assistance with getting this reading, making it a reality. So just lest anybody be concerned, this as a disclaimer, I'm a physician and not a physicist. And I will keep the physics simple. There are no equations in tonight's conversation. But I want to start with just a brief description of what is quantum theory. And quantum, let me get this back up here. There we go. So when we talk about quantum theory, it's the theoretical basis of modern physics, and it explains the nature and the behavior of matter and energy on the atomic and subatomic level. That these are tiny worlds that quantum physics is talking about. The nature and behavior of matter and energy at that level is also referred to as quantum physics or quantum mechanics. Now, while many quantum experiments examine very small objects such as electrons and photons and quarks, quantum phenomena are all around us. They act on every scale. So think the Big Bang and black holes. It's all quantum physics. Quantum entanglement, and where I got the title for my poetry collection, is at the heart of the difference between classical or Newtonian physics, which is from the 17th century. And that, incidentally, that kind of physics worked really well for about 300 years, and it got us to the moon and back. And quantum physics, which is the 20th century, and that notion of quantum entanglements is one primary feature of quantum physics that is not present in classical or Newtonian physics. So the quantum conclusion about what reality is for now is that reality is based on probability, like the flip of a coin or the roll of the dice. Reality is indeterminate, and reality is uncertain. Oi. So what is entanglement? In quantum physics, entanglement occurs when 2 particles, and they could be photons or quarks or electrons, are in relation to each other, and the actions performed on one of the particles affects the other particle simultaneously, no matter the distance between them. They could be on opposite sides of the universe. 2 particles are really acting as if they're one particle, sort of like identical twins. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance. He did not like this. This probability space of a particle is its quantum state, and it can only be described in relation to the state of another particle. So it's all about relationships. Relations are more important than individuals. To be is to be related. So these particles, they must correspond with each other in some mysterious way because they act as a single entity no matter how far apart. Physicists call this non-locality because the causation cannot be local. These particles don't touch, they don't communicate, they don't share a field of influence like a magnetic field. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance. Quantum entanglement bears a more than passing and even compelling resemblance to falling in love. Once two particles or two lovers experience a shared state, they are never the same. And this remains true even when they are separated by great distances. Another sort of metaphor for this notion of entanglement is that of the ballet. A ballet emerges from individual dancers. Entanglement arises from the connection between dancers. So what we perceive of as reality is the ballet, the beautiful relationships. The epigraph of my book is by renowned science writer and quantum physicist Carlo Rovelli. And it goes like this: reality is the web of interaction. The runner-up for epigraph, and I almost wish I'd used this instead, was by Niels Bohr, who was a Danish physicist. He won the Nobel Prize in 1922. He's one of the fathers of quantum theory and a creator of the model of the atom that most of us grew up with, you know, the nucleus and the electrons going around it and the protons and the neutrons. And he said, we must be clear when it comes to atoms, language can be used only as in poetry. The metaphysics of physics. Quantum theory sounds like something that Lewis Carroll might have dreamed of in Alice in Quantum Land. So I'm going to set a brief table for you of a quantum tea party. This is sort of a creative nonfiction because most of the quotes that I'm going to share with you are real. So let's look at this quantum tea party table, and there at one end is Sir Isaac Newton. He's your grouchy old uncle who grumbles, bloody idiots, I told you how the universe works 350 years ago. Across the table is Erwin Schrödinger, Nobel Prize 1933. He's a jovial Austrian physicist, another one of the parents of quantum theory. And he demonstrated that electrons could be either waves or particles, but are neither. Their state is a probability space. Schrödinger has a cat on his lap, and as he strokes Shady the cat, he repeats, entanglement is the essential feature of quantum mechanics. Entanglement is the essential feature of quantum mechanics. Next to Schrödinger is Niels Bohr. He's a Nobel Prize 1922. He's a Danish dandy whose bow tie is crooked. He pontificates as if lecturing at the University of Copenhagen. No one is listening. His eyes closed, he explains, an electron is not anywhere. That is, it does not have a position until we measure it. All it has is a wave of probabilities of being in one place or another. It's not that we don't know, it's that we cannot know. Reality does not allow us to know position and speed of a particle simultaneously. Before we measure a particle, we can't know where it is, and on and on and on, blah, blah, blah. Schrödinger's cat is purring loudly. Ah, there across the table is Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize 1965, a brash American who's making the crazy sign with his finger against his temples and his tongue lolling. Ugh. And he's saying to anyone who will listen, I can safely say no one understands quantum mechanics. Frumpy old Albert Einstein, Nobel Prize 1921, sitting next to Sir Isaac Newton, leans over and says to him, "I'm with you, Izzy." Albert is getting more and more steamed by the conversation, contemptuous of the notion that the universe is governed by probability, an idea fundamental to quantum theory. He pounds the table and exclaims, "God does not play dice with the universe." And then he mumbles to Newton again, "Spooky action at a distance, rubbish." To which Niels Bohr snaps back, "I heard that, Albert. Stop telling God what to do." To be sure, this tea party is still going on. It gets crazier and crazier. So here's a poem called Spooky Entanglement. Relationships in our 4 dimensions are challenging at best. We plant seeds in each other, interact often at great distance. Yet, no matter how far, I carry you in my heart and soul. We are entangled. I take this for granted. It hardly seems strange. Sometimes it feels spooky. In the weird world of quantum physics, a particle on one side of the universe simultaneously affects a particle on the other side of the universe, a long-distance relationship. Physicists call it simultaneity and quantum entanglement. Einstein had his doubts. Spooky action at a distance, he scoffed. Something has to exceed the speed of light, and that is forbidden, a civil violation, 3 points on your license, and a warning not to reoffend. And talk about a long-distance relationship, lovers connected by something unknown, something more than banal electrons, photons, particles, and other barely visible and invisible spooky stuff. What Einstein didn't appreciate, much less understand, was love at first sight. Recognition of soulmates from opposite ends of the universe and in 11 dimensions. Spooky is another way of saying, I love you. To kind of help us wrap our minds around this weird physics, we have the thought experiment that's known as Schrodinger's cat. So here's how that thought experiment works. Schrodinger thought, his thought experiment went like this. He placed a cat in a box with a tiny bit of radioactive substance. When the radioactive substance decays, it triggers a Geiger counter, which causes a poison to be released, which kills the cat. We will not know if this event has occurred until we open the box. Thus, as long as the box remains closed, the cat ends up dead and alive at the same time. Although I must say, I've always wondered, won't the dead cat smell after a few days? To put alive and dead into human terms, we have a tendency to claim truth based on our limited and subjective experience, even as we ignore or deny other people's limited subjective experiences, which may be equally true, alive and dead at the same time. So here's my tribute to Schrodinger's cat. Erwin Schrödinger, a gentle giant in physics, considered the intersections, science, philosophy, ethics, and religion. He sought the Holy Grail, the grand unified theory of everything. He failed, as has every quantum explorer. What do we remember him for? In a fit of quantum uncertainty, while conducting a thought experiment without safety goggles, he concluded that Shady the cat he kept in a box was alive and dead. An atom, he reasoned, and presumably a cat, can be in 2 places at once. Shady the cat was never the same after being alive and dead in a box, as you might imagine. My cat mysteriously disappears and is often in several places at once, so this theory does not trouble me. Though we seek it relentlessly, there is no grand unified truth, only our experience, our relative view, our daily thought experiments. 2,500 years before Schrödinger, at the time of the Buddha, 5 Indian blind men, wise men, assessed an elephant and each concluded with surety that the gentle giant was very like a rope, like a stump, a giant fan, a snake, or hard and smooth like a spear. By comparison, Schrödinger's cat is only alive and dead. Both parables suggest the question, pursue an answer or indulge the mystery. Maybe we really haven't come that far, except that our thought experiments are more intricate and complex, our capacity for delusion bottomless. A crater on the dark side of the moon, the side we never see, is named Schrödinger to honor his vision of the unseeable. The Austrian 1,000 shilling banknote bears his portrait. My cat sleeps the restless sleep of the dead, purring, delighted to be alive. So I want to talk a little bit about my process as a poet. I compose many of these poems while I hike the Long Trail and Green Mountain Wilderness alone. I copy each poem's first draft into a logbook at one of the Long Trail shelters. Most everybody who hikes the Long Trail or is a through hiker on the Long Trail, either the Appalachian Trail or the Long Trail, it takes on a trail name and a trail identity. My trail name is Mountain Poet. This poem is dedicated to all those courageous enough to make a first draft, and to those who created the James Webb Space Telescope. First draft. And I left this first draft at the Battelle shelter on the Long Trail. Every poem begins as a first draft, a moment of creation, a microscopic big bang, a moment that violates the laws of physics, a moment to be a primordial God. The heat of creation cools, syllables coalesce, words spontaneously combust, joining innumerable stars to offer navigation, orientation, pure delight in our galaxy of possibility, of love and loss. The first draft is unique, unedited, inspired at the moment of creation. Turn your telescopes to this moment and marvel, you are creating a universe. So I'm also a musician and a singer. I hear music in language. As a physician, I would hear stories, sometimes up to 100 a day, from parents, from kids, from babies. Yes, babies tell stories, colleagues. I'm a hiker and a canoeist. In the silence and meditative space of wilderness, I experience interdependence, interconnection, and mindfulness. I'm a Grandma Moses kind of poet, inspired by other poets such as Billy Collins, David Budbill, Mary Oliver, and Gary Snyder, to name a few. I started writing poems after the birth of my patient Jade in 1983. I was a young pediatrician in a demanding solo practice on the Canadian border, Enosburg Falls and Richford. Jade was born with Pignaud-Chauquier syndrome type 1, a fatal genetic defect. She lived just 6 months with a tracheotomy tube to breathe, home health nursing, oxygen, suction machines, monitors for heart rate and breathing, and a screeching alarm if she stopped breathing. I made house calls every week. There are 10 connected poems about these house calls in this collection, and here's the first. Jade, 1 month. It's a very rare problem. Oh, incidentally, I am writing these poems to Jade's mother, whose name is Pam. It's a very rare problem. The geneticist at the medical center seems pleased with his diagnosis, eager to teach a young physician alone on the Canadian border. Pinya Shokir, type 1, genetics that would wilt Mendel's peas. Pinya Shokir, type 1. I think of Native Americans each time I write Jade's lethal diagnosis. The one time you saw the geneticist, he said with cruel, clairvoyant authority, Jade will forget to breathe one day. A tiny blue tube punched through Jade's neck gurgles and coos. Black searching eyes animate her swollen doll's face, cheeks shiny like porcelain. Though only a month old, you tell me she already looks for you, searches for your voice. Pam, I see your face in Jade's, though she has multiple deformities. The familial mirror is cracked, not shattered. I'm up a lot with her at night, you say. Everybody tells me to sleep, but Jade won't be here in 6 months. You said it matter-of-factly. Then I'll have time to sleep, but I think I'll always be tired. Jade did forget to breathe. The alarm screamed, not a false alarm this time. You crossed your linoleum floor on sure feet, suctioned the baby blue tube like the home health nurse showed you, and kept Jade here a bit longer. You seem to know exactly what you were doing. I was nervous, you confess, after I tell you that you are a hero. Doctoring is a complex mixture of hard science and our mysterious entanglements. Quantum theory has the quality of a secular faith, cold, hard facts and equations that mix freely with mystical notions of creation, relation, and reality. Quantum theory tells us that particles interact at great distances and are made of tiny vibrating strings. The universe is created with a big bang out of nothing and expands into nowhere. We exist in not 3 dimensions, but 11. Time is probably an illusion, not a 4th dimension. How can you not write a poem? So here are some thoughts on time. This is from my first collection, Poems from the Wilderness. I think it's pertinent. It's called A Stubbornly Persistent Illusion. And there's an epigraph to this poem by Albert Einstein. The distinction between the past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. The stubbornly persistent illusion of time is obvious when I consider the photo collages, when I gaze at my young father and mother from where they live on my wall, patient, constant, faithful. Dad is 20, a full head of dark hair, sitting on a dirt road in Italy beside his rucksack, puffing a pipe. He stares past the frame, past the smoke of his pipe into 1938, unaware of the looming psychotic break of war. He is 15 years younger than my son. Mom gifts the photographer her Mona Lisa smile as if just informed of her first pregnancy, my brother. I know their crude taxonomy, daddy, Heinz, Harvey, finally dad, mommy, nani, nana, finally mom, a mere slice of their lives across an ocean of time. What matters is that they are here defying time as long as I notice them. In my orderly synaptic brain, past is mere memory, present moment to moment elusiveness, everything and nothing, future, infinity, everything possible. How many dimensions do I inhabit? Merrily, 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 life is but a dream from which we cannot awaken. So I'm positing here that we only exist in relationship. Relationship is the matrix in which we endeavor to understand. But astoundingly, we can only identify 5% of the matter and energy in our universe. The other 95%, dark matter, dark energy, of which we have no clue, holds us together and causes the universe to expand or stretch. We don't even have words for it. So there's this quantum microscopic world, and there's an evolving understanding of the cosmology of tiny particles, an abundant source of metaphor. And then there's the quantum macroscopic world, relationships. As a doctor, with the people I love, with wilderness, with ideas, with beauty. It's what we see, feel, and hear. On a lighter note, thinking about tracking down elusive particles inspired this noir poem. Dancing in my mind were the spirits of Dashiell Hammett, Sam Spade, the Maltese Falcon, Sidney Greenstreet, even Nick Danger, Third Eye. Extra credit if you can identify this reference. Instead of a snub-nosed 38, the Seamus in this poem packs the standard model. The real standard model is the name given in the 1970s to a theory of fundamental particles and how they interact, how they relate to each other. It incorporates all that is known about subatomic particles and predicts the existence of additional particles as well. The standard model is so powerful because it combines 3 of the 4 known forces of nature, the electromagnetic force, the weak force, and the strong force, into one coherent framework. The problem with the standard model is the bad boy force, gravity. So here is a noir poem. It's called Wanted, Muon. Long sought muon, a fat electron wobbled in an intense magnetic field, violating at least 2 thermodynamic laws and several lesser misdemeanors. Before it could be observed, it fled the scene of the crime, pursued by heavily armed physicists carrying standard issue, standard model equations with enough firepower to collapse a black hole. Espionage charges may be brought, as muon seems to be entangled with foreign forces beyond our ken. The perp has disappeared after being caught on surveillance cameras at Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory in Batavia, Illinois by Chris Polly, a Seamus on the case his entire career. The intermittent search continues. The vexatious muon is described as a fundamental particle, one of 17 at least, a fat electron with a negative attitude and magnetic spin. Coming of age in the Large Hadron Collider, muon is the product of repetitive trauma, violent collisions with ordinary particles. Muon is unpredictable and unstable. It hides out in empty space, which is not really empty at all, go figure. Muons and other miscreant particles appear and disappear, exist and don't exist. Muons are capable of radioactive decay, firing bursts, electrons and neutrinos in 2.2 millionths of a second. A shadowy network of particles aids and abets muon, which, before this sighting, was last spotted lurking in 2001 about Brookhaven National Laboratory. Muon has taunted physicists ever since. Muon, you cannot hide forever, said Inspector Polly. We have your numbers. So entanglement occurs at every level of existence. Indeed, life is entangled. from birth to death and beyond. How we interact is the foundation of culture, history, religion, and most fundamentally of all, of love. I spent a part of my medical career as a consulting physician for Job Corps in Vergennes. I did intake exams and managed psychotropic medications for some very tough, very challenged young people from 16 to 24 years of age. Here's one poem I wrote about my experience there. Dad was a dick. I was born in Wyoming. Why are you here? Because my dad was a dick. Booze and beatings. 5 times she went back to him. I heard him promise. Never again? Yeah, never again. He was so full of shit. Mom didn't listen to me, so she got beat up again. I have a son now. He's 2. His mom won't let me see him but once a month. What's your trade? Welding. I'm gonna make it. If it weren't for my son, I wouldn't be here. Open your mouth and breathe deeply. Now breathe normally. I'm listening to your heart. This next poem came from a Porter Hospital experience. I was called to pronounce a newborn who had died. It became an unanticipated lesson in connection and humility. The baby was born with a brain malformation and was expected to die shortly after birth. Quality of Mercy, Travis Paul. Travis Paul was born with anencephaly, failure of his brain to develop, but a strong heart. His parents hold him all day and into that good night when his tenacious heart finally stops at 1:05 a.m. I am called to pronounce him in the labor and delivery room where Travis Paul's father stretches out on a lounge chair, holding his breathless boy. Travis Paul's mother, a new mother again, smiles at me, beatific, sweet, as if she holds a secret. Travis Paul's father says proudly, "We thought he'd only live a few minutes." He gestures to the wall clock. 10 hours. He's like an old man. Travis Paul's chest is stone silent. I sit with Travis Paul's parents and utter inconsequential words. I feel the boundary, the precipice we all approach. Travis Paul has gifted me a consequential lesson, how to live with death. Outside the hospital, on my way home, a half moon hangs low in the east, heavy air sweet with spring. The moon is smudged on the horizon by my unanticipated tears. So I think we need a little little break here. One of my book of poems is probably one of the only books you'll ever see that has an intermission in it. And this is a poem that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. I hope it may hang on the doors of gross anatomy professors along with Gary Larson cartoons. So I want you to just listen for the music in this poem. Just by way of introduction, as a medical student, I spent much of my first year studying gross anatomy. We dissected a human, and I learned all the bones, blood vessels, muscles, ligaments, tendons, etc. I found the names to be beautiful. I savored their sound and feel, and I composed this poem in appreciation. It's called Anatomicus Anomalus, or Popliteal Goes the Weasel. We who work our digitorum to the bone, we obturators, O Lord Gracilis, Hail, infamous infraspinatus, reap and sow with glenoid fossa scythe, swing subscapularis, stand firm tensor fasciolata, in service to sacral obturator externus. Pineal wizard atop atlantoaxial capitellum, fix our gaze with sternocleidomastoid discipline, flex our hallicus longus, hold us erector spinae, network the interdigitation of serratus anterior with obliques, lats to glutes woven through thoracolumbar fascia. Receive each morsel of glottic gift, redeem thy communion, pylorus, duodenum, O jejunum, to what lengths you go, peristalsing past tropical isles of Langerhans, squeezing the sphincter of Odi for ichor, nectar of the gods, onto superciliated columnar epithelium, cum si cum sa. Extend our carpi radialis in exaltation, suck in the scent of life, Christa Galli, crest of the cock, framework for olfaction, praise, throw wide orbicularis oris, orbicularis oculi, trigeminal cranial 3, 4, and 6, carry us sacred ilium on our odyssey across tibial plateau, over pes planus, the plains of metatarsal, to stand proud at the edge of neocortex. So I think of that as a song. So this next poem is a love poem and about new hot love. It's a sort of a quantum spooky reflection. I was in my 20s when this happened. It's called Kitchen Hippie. Remember our first kitchen in a beat-up Vermont love shack with a cracked roof on the Canadian border, snow-blown State Road 108? Or was it a side street off the Champs-Élysées? Wind sucked heat from the walls, chilled my mattress on the floor. Indian print bedspread, 60s hippies, San Francisco. We were new, you hot and spicy, me cool and dark-haired. You stood at the stove, wearing only my blue coveralls, your naked shoulder peeking through a tear, a rent in time. You stirred a pan of magical herbs, added sweet and savory, a zing of chili, pepper for resolve, garlic for courage, lemon juice for longevity. You and I, tender and turgid, green scallion shoots, luminous, not yet sauteed. It was the old world. We were fresh and hot, gazing at each other like chocolate in anticipation of melting. Let's see. I do want to leave some time for questions and conversation and discussion. So I think I'm gonna end here. And since we've been talking about life and death and phantasmagorical science, I will end with a joke. So 2 grave robbers are digging up Mozart's grave. They open the coffin, and there's Mozart sitting up and erasing his music. One grave robber says, "Wolfgang, what are you doing?" Mozart looks up and says, "Ach, I am decomposing." So with that, I think I'll just open this up to questions, conversations, whatever.
Thanks so much, Jack. You couldn't hear everybody laughing on Zoom because we were all on mute.
On mute, okay.
And if anybody wants to put a question in the chat, you're welcome to do that as well.
Jack, hi, it's Alice Leeds. How are you?
Hi, Alice. Hi.
I'm just wondering, I've read and enjoyed both of your books, Life in a Jar and Before the Court of Heaven. Am I getting that right?
Yes, correct. Yes.
Yeah. And I'm just wondering what made you want to make the switch from writing prose into poetry.
Well, I started out with poetry in my, my history as a writer. It was poetry that was the first sort of expression of me trying to understand and trying to figure out myself and my patients and my relationships with them. So it was very much, and I did that poetry writing for myself. I didn't share those poems with anybody. It was really sort of a process that that was satisfying to me for understanding these relationships. And it was only later, it was, 1992 is when I started writing Before the Court of Heaven. And it was in response to just an amazing story I heard at a Yom Kippur service at Middlebury College. So it was the story that grabbed me. So I didn't set out to be a writer per se. I was a private poet, and then I was hijacked by this amazing story that led to Before the Court of Heaven. And then in the 10 years or 8 years later, I stumbled across the Life in a Jar story. So both of those books were really kind of accidental, and I can only describe them as just hijacking my attention and my sense of what I could do as a sort of my mission to confront and deal with the Holocaust, to be a witness to the Holocaust in those two ways, because both of those stories are related to the Holocaust. But poetry was always the sort of the foundation. That's where I started, and it was as a way of trying to get some understanding of my process as a physician first, and then when I started writing poems as I was hiking, I realized that there was a much larger field of my sort of attention that was just drawn to write as poetry. And I was at Breadloaf 3 times, and both for fiction and poetry, and have then did some auditing of courses. But basically, I'm an untrained poet, and I'm an undisciplined poet. I write when the feeling moves me. I'm not a regular sit down kind of write every day at the same time kind of poet. So it's and that's what's really so fun about being retired and writing poetry again, is that it's an opportunity for me to just be available to whatever thoughts and words come to me. And as I said, as a musician, I find language to be a kind of music. So it's, yeah, so poetry was where it all started.
Thanks, Jack. And that makes me wonder, I'll just put a follow-up to that. Have you written any songs?
Any songs? I did write some songs a long time ago when I was like in my 20s. But they weren't very good, and I'm not even sure where all of them are. So that was practice poetry.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you, Alice.
Jack, my name's Julie.
Mhm.
You touched on this, but I'm curious about your writing process. It clearly sounds like you write because it's a way to process your experiences, but I'm wondering about how you approach publishing.
Well, the Life in a Jar and Before the Court of Heaven, I self-published. And I had reached out to agents and publishers, and I was not able to get a publisher to pick it up. And when I was putting the poetry collections, it was when my first collection of poems, I submitted it to an international poetry contest, the Proverse Prize, and it won first prize. It won first place, and along with that came the offer to publish the collection. So I suddenly had a publisher, and they then also published the Entanglements as well. So I find the publishing world to be both bewildering, perplexing, baffling, and astounding. It is a crazy world. I'm happy not to be too entangled with the publishing world, because it is kind of I don't know. I don't really understand the ins and outs and the complexity and the waywardness of how publishing decisions get made. Life in a Jar, which was rejected by every publisher I sent it to, has sold over 100,000 copies. So some publisher made a mistake in not picking that up.
And what about your decision to write just for your own process versus write for others to read?
That felt like therapy. That felt like sort of self-therapy for me, to try to understand my sort of personal reactions and connections and relationships, first with patients, and then I realized that it was really a very satisfying and productive way for me to process a lot of strong emotional feelings about this, about being a doctor, being a husband, being a father, and I recommend it highly as self-therapy. It's very inexpensive and very satisfying.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Well, Jack, unless anybody else has any questions, we probably will wrap up, but I want to let everybody know that we have all of Jack's books at the library for checkout, though Entanglements has been very popular and rarely is on the shelf. So if you're interested in reading his work, feel free to stop by and we can get you connected with those materials. So Jack, thank you so much for joining us in Bristol, and it was great to have you.
Thank you, Coco, for making this happen, and thank you to all of you who have joined this Zoom, and I appreciate the opportunity to share some of these poems with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack.
Good night,
Thank you very
everybody.
much.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, librarian. Bristol.
Yes.